in a quiet town where everyone knew everyone, something strange happened. Local residents began to go missing. At first, these were only isolated cases, and no one attached much importance to it. However, every day the disappearances increased, and the tension in the city increased. Investigator Matt was summoned to the scene of one of the disappearances. It was the third in a week. The house where the missing girl lived looked normal: a neat lawn, well-groomed flowers on the windowsills. Nothing indicated that something terrible could have happened in it. But the more Matt inspected the house, the more he became convinced that something was wrong here. After a thorough examination at home, Matt noticed a strange black boiler standing on the kitchen table. Something dark and viscous was boiling in it. Unexpectedly for himself, Matt felt a bite of fear in his chest. He tried to remember where he had already seen something like this, and suddenly remembered it was a liquid used to disinfect medical instruments. But what was she doing here, in a simple girl's kitchen? Without thinking twice, Matt decided to look into the black cauldron. When he came closer, he saw something terrible in it. There were severed fingers, burnt pieces of flesh, pieces of hair. Matt recocked, feeling the nausea in his throat. He called for reinforcements and started exploring the whole house more carefully. Soon a secret room was discovered, where ugly instruments resembling surgical ones were found. Inside the room there were traces of blood and even more nasty finds. After the arrest of the owner of the house, Matt faced an unexpected turn of events. It turned out that all this horror was the work of an ordinary, by appearance, scientist who conducted his experiments on people in the basement of his house. He used different methods to hide his crimes, but his cruel experiments were discovered thanks to Matt's guessing. Now that the truth has come out, the residents of the city have felt mixed feelings of relief and horror. They couldn't believe that something similar could have happened in their quiet town. But the story of this case became a warning to everyone who thought that evil could be hidden in the most ordinary places. This was just the beginning of solving mysterious disappearances, which became very famous throughout the city. People whispered anxiously to each other on the streets, thinking about what secret horrors could be hidden under the idyllic surface of their cozy town. Matt continued his investigation, trying to understand the motives of this madman. Many records and logs were found in his house, in which he described his experiments and observations. However, most of the records were written in illegible handwriting, which made them extremely difficult to understand. Gradually, Matt began to build a picture of what was happening. It turned out that the scientist, whose name was Gregor, was a former employee of a local hospital. He was found mentally unstable and fired on suspicion of unethical behavior. After that, he left the city and began to lead a reclusive lifestyle, disappearing for long periods of time. But in fact, he continued his dangerous experiments, hoping to find the key to eternal life and unlimited power. Matt felt that he was close to solving. He needed to find the last pieces of the puzzle that would help him close this gloomy case. He continued a thorough examination of Gregor's house, going through every corner, every closet, every drawer in search of additional evidence. And so, when Matt was already beginning to lose hope of finding something new, his eyes caught on an old book abandoned in the corner of the room. He picked it up and started flipping through the pages, paying attention to strange drawings and records. Among the many pages filled with incomprehensible symbols and formulas, Matt found something that caught his attention. This was Gregor's last record, where he described his last experiments and his intentions. In the recording, Gregor spoke about his desire for immortality and power over life and death. He conducted a series of experiments trying to find a way to gain immortality and transform the human body beyond recognition. His experiments were ruthless and cruel, and a lot of people fell into his hands. But the most surprising thing was that in the last lines of the record, Gregor admitted that he was wrong in his aspirations. He realized that his thirst for power and immortality led only to death and suffering. He realized his guilt and decided to put an end to his crazy experiments. Matt felt mixed feelings while reading these lines. He realized that even the most misadventures can have a human face, and even those who commit terrible things can have doubts and remorse. After Matt completed his investigation and provided all the evidence to the authorities, the city began to recover from the upheavals caused by these terrible events. Residents have become more cautious, more vigilant, knowing that evil can be hiding in the most unexpected places. Gregor was sentenced to life imprisonment for his crimes. He spent the rest of his life in a prison cell, burning with inner shame and remorse for what he did. His name has become a symbol that even the noblest ideals can lead to terrible consequences if they rush too far. Catherine, a young and talented writer, once again felt the raging passion for creativity that made her heart beat faster. After days of hard work on her new novel, she realized that she needed solitude to find inspiration and complete her work. That's why she decided to retreat to a forest cabin, where she hoped to find the peace and quiet necessary to finish her project. Arriving at the wooden cabin, Catherine felt as if she were in another world. The surrounding nature was full of life and tranquility, and she felt that in this secluded place she could fully immerse herself in her creativity. Stepping inside the cabin, she felt excitement mixed with a sense of freedom. Inside, everything was simple and cozy: a small room with a fireplace, a comfortable reading chair, and a desk for work. Catherine unpacked her things, spread out her notebooks, pens, and laptop on the table, preparing for the creative process. From the first days, everything went smoothly. Catherine immersed herself in her novel, finding new ideas and experiencing the emotions of her characters. She wrote day and night, not noticing how time flew by. But as the nights grew darker and quieter, she began to notice something strange in the surrounding world. At first, these were just insignificant details: strange sounds in the forest, unusual tracks on the ground. Once, when she stepped out onto the porch to enjoy the fresh air, she heard a quiet rustle in the leaves. She looked around but saw nothing. Sighing, she decided it was just her imagination and went back inside. But with time, strange things began to happen more often and became increasingly unusual. Catherine began to feel that someone or something was watching her from the darkness of the forest. She felt eyes on her, heard footsteps around the cabin, but when she went outside, she saw no one. The nights became especially difficult. Catherine often woke up from strange sounds coming from the forest: whispering, even something resembling footsteps. She tried to resist the fear, comforting herself with the thought that it was just animals or the wind in the trees. But one day, as she sat at the table trying to focus on her writing, she heard an unmistakable sound outside the window. It was something more than just a rustle. It was heavy, ominous breathing. Catherine blinked, trying to collect her thoughts. Her heart began to beat wildly. She stood up, approached the window, and looked outside. Through the glass, she saw the silhouette of a man standing in the darkness. His silhouette was blurred, but she could make out dark eyes filled with madness. She pressed her hand to her lips to stifle a scream and recoiled from the window. She felt fear engulf her completely, filling every cell of her body. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't stay in this place, knowing that someone or something was watching her from the darkness. She hurriedly gathered her things, ignoring everything but the thought of escape. She knew she needed to get out of here as soon as possible. Catherine ran out of the cabin, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't look back, ignoring the sounds coming from the darkness. She ran, not stopping until she reached her car. Her hands trembled as she took the keys out of her pocket and unlocked the door. She sat behind the wheel, starting the engine. Her breathing was heavy, her eyes filled with tears. But at the last moment, as she pressed the gas pedal, she heard a sound that made her freeze. It was a sinister laughter coming from the forest. Catherine recoiled, her hands trembling, realizing that in the darkness lurked a threat she could not imagine. She pressed the gas and fled from that place, her heart beating so strongly that she felt as if it would burst from her chest. She survived, but returning home did not bring her relief. The horror she experienced reflected in her eyes, and she knew she would never forget this nightmare in the forest. The town, mired in peace and quiet, witnessed a series of mysterious disappearances. At first, these were cases that seemed isolated, but as time passed, the number of disappeared increased, and with each new loss, the tension in the city increased. The local police were completely confused. Their usual methods of investigation gave nothing. There were no witnesses, no evidence, no traces that could indicate the whereabouts of the missing. They appealed to federal agencies for help, but even specialists could not offer an explanation for the mysterious disappearances. This became the main topic for discussion in the local newspaper. Residents began to feel insecure even in their own homes. Fear spread through the streets, and all citizens were waiting for the next disappearance with anxiety and uncertainty. Matt, A local investigator was deeply involved in the investigation. He spent days and nights trying to find at least some trace that could lead to the solution of this mystery. His perseverance was striking, but even he began to doubt whether he could ever find answers to these mysterious disappearances. One day, when Matt was returning home after a long day of work, he noticed something strange on the corner of the street. It was a man standing in the dark watching him. He decided it was his imagination and accelerated his pace to get home as soon as possible. But the shadow continued to follow him, as if his fears had become a reality. He stopped and turned around, but didn't see anyone. His heart began to beat faster when he felt someone or something coming to him out of the dark. At that moment, he heard footsteps behind his back. He turned around and saw a man dressed in a black coat with his face hidden in the darkness. He tried to step back, but his legs refused to obey, and he was chained. He felt how fear grips him, how his thoughts began to blur under the influence of this man. "Are you afraid?" Matt the man whispered. Matt tried to look away, but couldn't. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice trembling with fear. "I want you to know that I'm here," the man replied. "What did you do with the missing people?" Matt asked, trying to gather his thoughts. "I didn't do anything," the man replied. "They belong to me now. They belong to the dark streets of this city." Matt realized that he had witnessed something that was beyond his understanding. He felt the darkness enveloping him, and he realized that his time was run out. At that moment, he realized that this was the end of his life, and the end of his life, and the end of hope for solving this mystery. When the residents of the city woke up in the morning, they found that Matt was missing. His house was empty and his car was found on the side of the road away from the city. They began their search, but no traces or evidence were found.